This is the Rick and Suzanne Show podcast. Hear Rick and Suzanne live weekdays 1 to 3 on CJAD 800.
Suzanne has the day off, and I'm never alone. I've got Sarah in here looking over me. I've got Sheldon pressing all the right buttons as usual. I've got you, and I've got Denise Charles joining me, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. Well, I don't know why she's in Barbados, but this should be fun. Many of us run from conflict. It just seems to be part of the human psyche. When we don't agree with an issue, sometimes we skulk away to fume and fuss privately instead of confronting the issue head on. What is it that we fear? She's got some answers to this, and if we have to go to Barbados to get it, then damn it, we will. Denise Charles, thank you.
Hi.
What? Now, you live there, right?
I live in Barbados. Yes, I'm a Barbadian.
Wow. I mean, I just want to sit and take that in.
Isn't the internet wonderful? Pardon?
It is wonderful. And can you see the ocean right now?
Well, not really from where I am, the room that I'm in, but I'm very close to the ocean right now.
Well, you are a life and relationship coach, and you are in a beautiful part of the world. And you wrote that many of us would never admit that we fear standing up for ourselves because to be bold, to be strong, to be assertive is politically correct. This is what is expected of us, well-adjusted adults, so we like to claim these traits as our own. Explain what you're saying here.
I'm really saying that as adults, most of us are expected to be able to stand up for ourselves. I'm a mother of 3 sons as well, and this is something that I taught them. You know, you need to be able to stand up for yourself at school. Don't allow someone to push you around. We teach this to our children, and it is expected that as adults we would have gotten the lesson and we would know what it means to voice our own opinion diplomatically. But when we get into a relationship, it is not always as easy as that. So even though it is politically correct as adults to be able to stand up for ourselves, as people in relationships, because we're dealing with a dynamic where there's someone that we care about and we don't want to offend them, or we're dealing with other internal issues in terms of how we feel about ourselves, then this doesn't always pan out as it should.
Well, yeah, and the way we react is we vacillate inconsistently between cowardice and bravado, as you've put it. Others can get aggressive, downright nasty, while still others just run away from everything with their tail between their legs. Why the extremes in our responses?
I think because the whole issue of dealing with difficulty and dealing with challenge isn't something that we navigate very successfully as young people, as children, or as adolescents. There are a few of us who may be very good at it. There may be a few of us who have mastered the skills. But from my own experience, from my own personal experience, from observation, as well as from coaching and counseling others, I recognize that being able to have a balanced approach to conflict is very, very rare. Very, very often we vacillate at those extreme ends. We often get very angry because we want to have our own way. We want to have it right now. We don't want to hear what anybody else has to say, or we're just too afraid to speak our mind. So we just keep it inward. And as I said, we skulk away like a puppy with its tail between its legs because we're afraid to let someone know that we have a different point of view or that we don't like what they're doing because we're afraid of losing them or we're afraid of offending them. We're afraid of damaging the relationship. So I find that there are those two extreme positions, even though I admit there are a few people who are able to balance it.
Fear, fear, and fear. By the way, we're speaking to Denise Charles, life and relationship coach, on conflict, being good, to not fear the confrontation. And she's joining us from Barbados, and I'll not try and be distracted by that. So this all sounds really good. But how do we practically learn to live with conflict? How do we use this?
I think the first thing we have to do is to recognize that conflict is normal. It is necessary. Life would be so boring without it. Who wants to be with someone who just does everything that they say? Well, I don't, certainly. You know, I always say I would hate to be married to me. I don't want someone who's going to agree with everything that I say, but I think we need to accept that conflict is a part of life. It's a part of the dynamic of relationships. And from the time we accept that, I think that gives us a headway because we're able to understand that our relationship is really, as I say, about relating in a ship. You know, if you want to put that as an analogy, or 2 people working together, rowing a boat together, working a canoe, whatever, you need that cooperation, that team effort to make the relationship work. And that will mean having to compromise, having to listen to other points of view, having to give way at times. Yes, having to stand up for yourself at times too. But in terms of looking for a certain level of honesty in the relationship, you want to be able to speak your mind and be able to say what you feel about certain things, even if your partner does not agree with you.
And not in anger and
yes.
not in fear. And I guess you have to learn how to do it, right?
You have to learn how to do it. And I think learning how to do it means being able to read between the lines. You need to be able to understand from the other person's perspective. I always ask couples, individuals in challenging situations, put yourself in your partner's perspective, in your partner's position. How do they feel when you say what you say in the way that you did? Did they feel angry? Did they feel defensive? Sometimes we just need to open up our hearts, be a bit more compassionate to other people's points of view. And I think that will enable us to be a bit more understanding and help us to be more maybe diplomatic, sensitive in terms of how we share, how we feel. I'm a very assertive person. I love to speak my mind. I've always been like that from a child, very opinionated. But in my relationship with my husband, even though this was not initially so, as I've been married for quite a while, I've learned how to pull back sometimes, how to wait a day instead of bringing up the issue at the volatile moment, because sometimes there's a volatile moment when that's not the right time to bring up the issue, and you need to be able to redress, come back the next day, sometimes the next week when your partner has settled down and the issue is not so sensitive at the time. So I think it calls for a high degree of what is known as emotional intelligence. We need to be able to be smart with our emotions, smart with how we relate to other people, smart with how we read our partner, read between the lines. Is this really the issue, or is it something else that happened last week that caused these angry words? Is he shouting at me because he hasn't had sex in 7 days? What is it? What is really behind this recent thing that we're having? So I think we need to be sensitive.
All right, let me speak my mind then, because I sense there's some vacillation in that you're holding back. If you're going to put it off, that to me, why put it off? Anything like that?
Because it's not that you always have to do it, but you have to read each situation. I do believe in principles and rules and laws and so on, but there isn't every time that you have to respond in the same way to every situation. If a situation is really sensitive and you and your spouse have been shouting back and forth at each other, or your partner is extremely angry about a particular thing, then that may not be the time to deal with it. That may not be the time to delve deeper. You might just make the situation worse. So I'm not talking about neglecting to deal with it. I'm not talking about putting it on the back burner. I'm just talking about using wisdom and maybe waiting a while before you actually bring it up, because sometimes a day or two does make a big difference.
You pointed this out, and be my last point. We tend to feel more in control and less like victims when we are either avoiding issues or overreacting to them.
Yes.
And yet when we do take this on, it turns out more often than not that once you confront these things, there really wasn't a big consequence or a blowback, except that you managed to communicate and move on.
Yes, that is true. Sometimes we have a fear, as I said, and we have to deal with the issue of fear, because sometimes our fear is not necessarily based on reality, but it's based on our perception. So we perceive that we will fall out of favor with our spouse. We perceive there will be a fallout in terms of affection, or there may be a fallout in terms of financial support, depending on the texture or the tone of your relationship. We fear there may be some significant problem, and it's just a fear. It's a perception that we have, and it may not actually be based on fact. And that prohibits us from doing what we need to do. Meanwhile, the relationship is falling apart, it's deteriorating, and we're not confronting the issue that we need to confront. So we do need first, I think, to deal with our fears. We need to look within ourselves. Sometimes we need to look back at our past in terms of how we were raised, how we were socialized, how we came to think and feel the way that we do, and work through these things with our partner. If it is too much to handle, sometimes you may need to see someone like me, a relationship coach or a counselor, someone who can help you to deal with the issues.
Denise, you've been very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is the Rick and Suzanne Show podcast. Hear Rick and Suzanne live, weekdays 1 to 3 on CJAD 800.